And now, AM 650 presents your source for leading-edge news and information on today's hottest products and services. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.
Well, hello and welcome to this edition of Experts on Call and Quay Pacific's Talk About Strata. I'm Sterling Fox, joined in studio by my co-host, the Executive Director of the Condominium Homeowners Association of British Columbia, Tony Giventu. Hi, Tony. Good to see you.
Hi, Sterling. How are you doing tonight?
I am doing just great, thanks. I should probably also mention my co-host, the much-read condo columnist in 24 Hours, the Vancouver Province, the Victoria Times columnist, and I don't have enough time to read all of the publications of the province that take your material, but boy, you've got quite a readership and hundreds of columns under your belt.
You know, it's such an amazing opportunity to be able to get single pieces of information out to the general public.
Yeah.
And the number of emails that we get back between the radio show and the columns every week are overwhelming, but it's amazing when you start looking at 27,000 different strata corporations around the province.
Right.
And the fact that so many of them have very unique individual problems that are not really paralleled with any other development because all the developments are quite different.
Oh, sure. And of course, and therefore that leaves almost 27,000 unique sets of circumstances, doesn't it?
It certainly can. Yeah.
Wow. Glad you mentioned emails already. Our address is radio@keypacific.com. We'll clarify the spelling of Quay Pacific. It's a bit tricky. But that's the email address we give out on this program every time we go on the air, every second week or so. And of course, Tony can also be reached through CHOA, the Condominium Homeowners Association, .bc.ca, a fabulous website for anyone looking to, well, just find out more about strata living in British Columbia. And tonight, the program is all about the summer mailbox. Tony has brought along, we've narrowed it down to a manageable number, I hope, but we've got quite a stack of emails and just covering all sorts of topics. We've been asking for these emails, and by gosh, we got them in spades tonight, don't we?
Well, I look at my inbox some days, and there might be 200 or 300 emails, and you start going through them, and again, each one of them has a set of circumstances that is unique. So we thought we'd just pick some out that kind of deal with some of the generic issues that are coming across the desk these days.
Okay, now the first one is from Jerry, and it's about renting, and here we go. We have a problem in our strata where an owner believes he's grandfathered to rent his unit because he was a first purchaser. Every time he changes renters, he threatens to sue us if we try to limit his ability to rent his unit. Our bylaws do not permit rentals except for Strata Property Act exemptions. So how do we sort this out? The Strata plan number is so on and so forth. So yeah. How do you resolve this issue? First of all, I guess the writer, Jerry, says this person in their complex believes he's grandfathered, being a first purchaser, into being allowed to continue renting his unit. So let's take it piece by piece. Is that accurate? Does that exist?
Well, that's maybe we should call this show Urban Myths, because it occurred to me that each one of these emails has a little myth attached to it that you find on blog sites and in general information sites where people have dialogue. But one of the misconceptions I think that condo owners get is that there is such a thing as grandfathering.
Oh.
Sometimes you'll see the word grandfathering in bylaws of strata corporations,
yes,
but it's never really defined to say what it means. The Strata Property Act doesn't use the word grandfathering when it comes to rentals or age or pet restrictions. What it uses is the word exemption, but they're all conditional exemptions.
Okay.
Right? So they're exemptions to certain parties subject to a variety of conditions.
So he says in his letter, Jerry says, our bylaws do not permit rentals except for Strata Property Act exemption. So he did include the legal language required.
And their bylaw it sounds like their bylaw is fairly accurate and probably enforceable. And the exemptions are as follows. There's three types of exemptions. The first one is a family rental. So if I rent to my children or parents of either myself or my spouse, they're exempt from the rental bylaw.
Okay, because it's immediate family.
It's immediate family, only children or parents of you or your spouse.
Okay.
So that's that's the first group. The second is hardships. Even though the Strata says they prohibit rentals, I might have lost my job. I need to rent out my unit and go live with some friends or family for a while until I can
Get back
make
on your
ends
feet
meet.
again. Sure.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and need to pay my mortgage, my Strata fees and taxes. So I will make an application to the Strata Council, give an argument to them that I have a hardship based on the following financial circumstances.
Right.
They'll ask me for credible information to prove that that's true, and they can ask me for everything.
Right.
And we'll meet, probably have a hearing, and the Strata, if they're acting reasonably, will give me an exemption for a period of a year or 2 years or even longer to be able to rent till I can sort myself back out.
It sounds like the voice of experience here, friends. It sounds like this sort of hardship exemption does from time to time get granted.
I think it happens every day.
Okay.
Just the normal cycle of life, people losing their jobs, people in financial difficulty,
Sure.
people with serious illness who have to move into facilities for short terms, family issues require problems. Hardships occur frequently. It's Strata Corporation can grant the hardship, but it's a conditional. It's a conditional exemption. We're going to give you the hardship for a period of a year.
Right.
A year from now, come back to us and we'll have a discussion as to whether the hardship still exists. If
Okay.
it doesn't, you'll have to comply with the bylaw. If it does, we may continue it for another year.
Now, but in this case, Jerry's email refers to an occupant of his Strata complex in which this person feels entitled, read grandfathered,
Yes.
which is not a legal word in Strata law in BC. Interesting, I didn't know that.
It's not in our legislation for this
Okay,
use, right?
Something to remember, folks. Anyway, the person, the owner of this unit feels entitled, or he is grandfathered to rent this unit, and so does. And if
Right.
one renter doesn't work out or moves on, okay, then let's bring in somebody else. And everyone else in the Strata is going, wait a second, why do you think you have the right to rent? Our bylaws don't permit renting, so what remedy is there here?
Well, this is the third possible exemption because their bylaw says except for the exemptions granted by the Strata Act.
Aha.
So we had family, we have hardship, and this is the third possible exemption, which is an owner-developer rental disclosure statement. So when the owner-developer creates the disclosure statement to be able to sell units,
Right.
they file the disclosure statement with the superintendent of real estate. Under the Condominium Act and now the Strata Property Act, there was a specific form that they filed, which was called a rental disclosure statement.
Oh, so if they were going to include rental units in the complex, it had to be, they had to say so right up front.
They did, and they do now, and it's changed a little bit as of 2010. But basically, before 2010, and looking at this Strata plan, I can see that this is an old Strata plan.
Okay.
And did a little homework, so I'll be able to answer this question in a minute.
All right.
Basically, the owner-developer, you would contact the superintendent of real estate. You would ask for a copy of the rental disclosure statement for this Strata plan. If the rental disclosure statement said that the owner-developer intended to rent or lease all of the units without a specific period of time, right?
Okay.
It might have said without sequence, or it might have said we intend to rent or lease them until January 1st, 2050. It might have had a date on it,
Right.
Didn't necessarily have a date. What it basically did was it granted the privilege or the right for an exemption to the first purchaser only.
Oh, okay.
So if
And this person is the first, he is the first purchaser of his unit.
he's the first purchaser, and if the owner-developer filed this document saying that I intend to rent or lease these units, the first purchaser is granted that exemption.
And so therefore feels that he has been grandfathered this right.
Well, if he believes he's been grandfathered to this right, then all he needs to do is obtain a copy of the
Sure.
rental disclosure statement.
That's right.
And then the Strata Council has a bona fide document in front of them that says, this is the first purchaser, this is a valid rental disclosure statement, and he's exempt, and so we're in compliance with our bylaws,
Right.
right? Because that's the problem the Strata Council has is we have to comply with our bylaws. We have
Absolutely.
to enforce these bylaws. Produce the document for us, we'll get it. Now, the Strata Corporation is supposed to have a copy of this document by law anyhow. So if there's a rental disclosure, so we would know that. The only thing that buyers also need to know is as of January 1st, 2010, there was a change to the legislation. So it's no longer for new stratas filed after January 1st, 2010. It's no longer the first purchaser. It's the actual strata lots themselves that are now exempt. up until the date of expiry. So you'll see on new forms that were filed after as of 2010 that the owner-developer intends to rent strata lots 1 to 85, so that's probably all 85 units,
Right.
until January 1st, 2050, which means all those units are exempt from rental bylaws until January 1st, 2050, regardless of who owns them.
Okay.
Right? Under the old regime, if you were the first purchaser, when you sold your unit, that exemption expired.
Exactly, right. But this is still the first purchaser in this case.
Okay, so I did a little homework.
Oh, okay.
And I got a copy of the rental disclosure statement.
And
the developer did not intend to rent any
so
of the
there
units.
is no document that he can trot out to the next strata meeting and go, see? Back away.
Exactly, right? And so that's part of the issue, right? And that's so before you can answer these questions frequently, what you have to do is research the information.
Right.
Their bylaws did not provide any grandfathering. There's no such thing. Sometimes we see bylaws that say, unit 1, 22, and 15 are grandfathered from this bylaw, and there might be very specific reasons, although you have to be very careful that you're not creating an unfair balance of different types of classes or persons in the strata corporation. But there could be reasons why a strata lot might be exempt from something under the bylaws. But basically, you have to get your rental disclosure statement. And again, this is a requirement of the legislation. Every strata corporation must have a copy of the rental disclosure statement, because if a buyer comes along, if I want to buy in this strata, and I come along and I ask for a Form B information certificate, it's the obligation of the strata corporation to attach a copy of that rental disclosure statement to the Form B. It for two reasons. For older stratas, it doesn't necessarily benefit me because I'm a subsequent purchaser, but it does tell me that there was a rental disclosure statement and there may be people in the building who are still exempt.
So let me now go back to Jerry's original email questions for us tonight, Tony, because now that we've determined, and you through just doing some basic homework, that I'm sure the Strata Council could have done as well.
Well, they have it now.
Okay, right. But so the point here being, there was no such document, there was no such permission granted ever to this person to rent his unit in the first place, and he's been renting it since he owned it. So now, what remedy is there available to the Strata Council short of going, okay, once this tenant leaves, you're out of the rental business, it's not allowed in this building anymore?
Well, at this point, because it's gone on for quite a while, I would recommend that the Strata does get some legal advice on it, because it's a circumstance that has gone on for quite a long time. This is not just a new condition. Mm-hmm. The way they may want to treat it is give him written notice from their legal counsel advising that the moment your current tenant leaves, you are not permitted to rent, and if you rent, we will enforce the bylaw. Or they may choose to just simply enforce the bylaw from this day forward. You can't enforce it retroactively. Right. But under their bylaws,
and they can't kick the tenant out. I would guess there's still landlord-tenant laws that would prohibit that.
A tenant cannot be evicted from a unit because a landlord is renting in violation of the bylaws.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, but the landlord is going to find this very expensive because their bylaws permit a fine of $500 a week for unlawful rentals.
Oh.
So it's a real deterrent at $2,000 a month.
So there's a couple of caveats attached to your email. And Jerry, thanks for opening the door and the the summer email box for us tonight. So okay, two things. If you're looking to become a strata owner, it's important to know whether your unit or any of the units in your building are rentable. And also, if you're a renter looking perhaps to live in a condo where people take a little better care of their properties, or so the blogs say, that if you're looking specifically to rent in a strata environment, be extra double sure that the strata that you're looking at is actually it's permissible for you to rent there, because somebody may be pulling the wool over your eyes.
Well, and you might buy into an older strata that has no rental bylaws. Right. We could look and there's no rental bylaws. I can rent my unit, so we rent our unit. Yeah. We bought a unit as an investment. We see them a lot of areas near colleges and universities.
Sure,
right?
Of course, yeah.
They're good for rentals. They're good for occupancy. What ends up happening though is that in an older building, the strata corporation might change their mind and say, you know what, we've got some rental problems. Let's impose a rental restriction bylaw. Gets passed, and the unit you bought that you thought you could rent without any limitation suddenly now has limitations.
Sure, you bought this specifically, basically to let college kids pay your mortgage. It's an investment.
Yeah.
And maybe not anymore.
Well, and if you really want an investment, look at newer buildings from 2010 on that have a very specific date attached to the rental disclosure, because when you're purchasing into buildings from 2010 on, that say that the rental disclosure exemption is until January 1st, 2050. What that means is even if I buy it or you buy it from me or somebody else buys it from them, that unit is exempt from rental bylaws until January 1st, 2050. And so, once we get to that time period, we're in a situation where we have the ability to rent. But investors need to be very cautious about this.
Well, it sounds like everybody needs to do a lot of homework here when you're talking about your life, your circumstances, your residence, your postal code. Come on.
Well, and the Strata Council has a lot of work to do also. Strata
Yes.
Council have to maintain inventories of rentals, whether they're, that's the other thing. Let's say this bylaw said there's a maximum of 5 rentals permitted at any time. If the Strata doesn't have a monthly inventory of rentals, how do they know which 5?
True, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So they need to have a published inventory. And the other quirky thing about the legislation, which is logical, is because we have hardship, family, and owner-developer rental disclosure exemptions,
Right, the 3 classes.
all as exemptions,
Right.
they're not counted in the rental number. So while you could have 5 units as the maximum number of rentals, there might be 13 other units that are rented that are exempt. Those exemptions are not calculated in the limitation of the rental bylaw.
Interesting stuff. Jerry, thank you for your email. We have quite a stack to get through on this edition of Key Pacific's Talk About Strata. But if you'd like to start stalking our inbox for the next show, here's the email address that you can shoot right through to us. It's radio@Key Pacific, and this is the tricky part. Key Pacific is like, well, Westminster Key or Lonsdale Key. It's the old QUAY Key. So radio@QUAYpacific.com, and it'll get through to us. We're back with lots more after this.
There's still more ahead with Experts on Call, the show focused on delivering relevant and beneficial consumer information. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.